My name is Alex. I'm 24 years old. And for 6 years, my parents used my social security number to open half a dozen credit cards, maxing them out to the tune of $80,000 to fund my older brother's failed businesses and my mother's shopping addiction. I didn't know. I had never even owned a credit card. But by the time I was 22, I was working 60 hours a week across 2 exhausting jobs, trapped in my parents' windowless, concrete basement, completely convinced I was a failure. Every single apartment application I submitted was denied. Every loan for a beat-up used car was instantly rejected. And every time I cried over a rejection, my parents would pat my shoulder, tell me I just wasn't ready for the real world, and graciously offer to let me stay in my subterranean cage as long as I handed over 75% of my paychecks for rent. If you want to know what coercive control feels like, you don't need to look for bruises. Sometimes, it just feels like the low, constant hum of a dehumidifier in a windowless basement. The air down there always smelled faintly of mildew and old cardboard. There was a single, tiny egress window near the ceiling, but my father had permanently boarded it up from the outside for security reasons. According to my parents, I was incredibly lucky to be there. "The world out there will eat you alive, Alex," my mother would tell me, sipping her morning coffee while I laced up my non-slip shoes for my shift at the diner. "We're doing you a massive favor by letting you stay. Do you know what a studio apartment goes for these days? You should be grateful we're only charging you market rate." Market rate. That was the phrase they used to drain my bank account dry. I brought home my hard-earned paychecks every other Friday, and my father would be waiting at the top of the basement stairs with his hand out. Whatever meager scraps I had left went toward my bus pass and cheap groceries. For 6 years, my single driving goal was to escape. I wasn't asking for luxury. I just wanted a door I could lock. I wanted to turn 25 and actually feel like an adult. But every time I tried to claw my way out, an invisible hand shoved me right back down. I remember the first time it happened. I was 21. I had painstakingly saved $2,000 in tips, hiding the cash in a hollowed-out book so my parents wouldn't reevaluate my rent. I found a tiny run-down one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I paid the application fee and submitted my pay stubs. 3 days later, the automated email arrived. "We regret to inform you that your rental application has been denied due to an unsatisfactory credit history." I stared at the screen, baffled. How could I have bad credit when I had no credit at all? I assumed it was a glitch. But then, it happened again. When I was 22, the transmission on my beat-up scooter died. I desperately needed a car, so I went to a sketchy used car lot, eyeing a 10-year-old Honda Civic. The salesman took my information with a greasy smile. 10 minutes later, he came out of his office, his smile completely gone. "Look, kid," he said, handing my driver's license back like it was contagious. "I don't know what kind of mess you're into, but our system flagged you instantly. I can't even get you approved for a loan on a bicycle right now. You need to leave." The humiliation was a physical weight. I took the bus back to my parents' house in the pouring rain, soaking wet and utterly defeated. When I walked through the front door, my parents were sitting in the living room. The fireplace was roaring. My mother was flipping through a luxury catalog, and my father was pouring a glass of expensive red wine. I broke down. Standing there dripping onto the hardwood floor, I cried. I asked them what was wrong with me, why the system seemed entirely rigged against me. My mother simply closed her catalog, offering me a look of deep, patronizing pity. "Oh, Alex, we tried to warn you. You don't understand how the real world works. It's ruthless." My father took a sip of his wine. "This is exactly why we let you stay here, kid. You clearly don't have the financial maturity to handle real responsibility. The system weeds out people who can't cut it. If it weren't for us, you'd be homeless." I stood there, shivering, and let their words sink into my skin like poison. That is the true insidious nature of gaslighting. If someone you love tells you that you are broken often enough, you start believing you actually belong in the cage. I walked back down the stairs to my windowless basement and accepted my fate as the family failure. I had no idea that while I was crying over a denied loan for a used Honda Civic, my mother was holding a brand new $3,000 Prada handbag, and I definitely didn't know that she had bought it using a platinum credit card with my name printed right on the front. If I was the designated family failure, my older brother David was the undisputed king of success. At least, that's what his perfectly curated social media profiles demanded you believe. David was 28, 4 years older than me, and lived in a sleek, glass-walled apartment downtown. He wore tailored blazers over expensive t-shirts, flashed a heavy gold Rolex in every photo, and spoke exclusively in Silicon Valley buzzwords like synergy, disrupting the market, and hustle culture. In reality, David was a serial disaster. He had never held a real job for more than 6 months. Instead, he bounced from one catastrophic business venture to the next. When I was 19, it was a bespoke dog collar subscription box that folded in 3 weeks. When I was 21, it was an artisan beard oil company. When I was 23, it was a luxury watch dropshipping empire that resulted in a garage full of cheap, unsold inventory. Every single venture spectacularly crashed and burned, yet David never seemed to feel the heat of the flames. Every time a business went under, he somehow upgraded his lifestyle. He drove a brand new leased BMW. He took networking trips to Tulum and Miami. He never seemed to experience the crushing, suffocating anxiety over money that kept me awake at night in my windowless basement. And my mother was his biggest cheerleader. She matched his financial delusions dollar for dollar. While I was patching holes in my work uniform and buying dented cans of soup to save 50 cents, my mother lived like the wife of a billionaire. There was a constant, endless parade of glossy shopping bags coming through our front door. Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, Sephora. She got weekly blowouts at a high-end salon. She went on spontaneous, expensive wine-tasting weekends in Napa with her friends. The math simply didn't add up. My father was a mid-level manager at a regional logistics firm. He made decent, comfortable money. But he did not fund a 28-year-old's vanity projects and buy $3,000 handbags on a Tuesday money. I remember one specific Friday night that perfectly encapsulated the maddening invisible wall between their world and mine. I had just finished a brutal double shift at the diner. My feet were throbbing, my back ached, and my uniform smelled like old fryer grease. I walked through the front door, exhausted, only to be hit by the smell of catered garlic butter shrimp and expensive filet mignon. Upstairs, the house was alive with music and laughter. David was over, and they were celebrating the launch of his newest venture, an app that, as far as I could tell, didn't actually do anything. "Alex!" my mother called out as I tried to quietly slip past the kitchen. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a glass of champagne. "We ordered from that steakhouse downtown! David is pitching to a new angel investor next week. Come toast to your brother!" I looked at David, who was leaning against the granite counter, swirling an amber glass of whiskey. He gave me a condescending little smirk. "Rough shift at the diner, kid. Keep grinding. It builds character." I didn't have the energy to fight, and I certainly didn't feel welcome in my greasy uniform. I mumbled a congratulations, grabbed a packet of 99-cent instant ramen from the pantry, and retreated to the basement. I sat on the edge of my cheap mattress, waiting for the water to boil in my rusted microwave. Above me, I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses, the heavy bass of their music, and the loud, arrogant laughter of a family that had zero financial worries. I looked down at my bruised feet in my worn-out socks, and the central mystery of my life gnawed at me. How? How were they doing it? I was handing over 75% of my minimum wage paychecks just to survive in this concrete box. I was budgeting to the exact penny. I had zero debt because I had zero credit. Yet I was drowning. Meanwhile, they were living like reality TV stars on a middle-class salary. I convinced myself that my father must have inherited a massive, secret trust fund he never told me about. Or maybe he was quietly going into crippling, catastrophic debt to keep up appearances, sacrificing his retirement to spoil his wife and his golden child. I just didn't realize whose debt it actually was. I didn't know that every time my mother swiped a piece of plastic for a designer bag, or every time David needed a sudden infusion of cash for a failing business, the name on the account wasn't theirs. It was mine. But the truth can only stay buried in the basement for so long. Eventually, I decided to make one massive, desperate push for my independence, and it was the best job interview of my life that finally brought their entire house of cards crashing down. When you spend enough time living in the dark, you either go completely blind to your surroundings, or you start desperately clawing at the walls looking for a single crack of light. For me, that crack of light came in the form of a polished brass plaque on the side of a towering brick building downtown, First Heritage Regional Bank. I was 24, and I was absolutely suffocating. The 75% rent my father extracted from me every 2 weeks left me with barely enough to survive, let alone save for a deposit on an apartment. I realized that if I was ever going to escape that concrete basement, working harder at 2 minimum-wage jobs wasn't the answer. I needed a salary. I needed benefits. I needed a career. I scrolled through job boards during my 15-minute breaks at the diner, hiding in the walk-in fridge so my manager wouldn't yell at me. That's when I saw the listing for a full-time teller position at First Heritage. It paid nearly double what I was making combined. It offered a 401k, health insurance, and paid time off. But most importantly, it offered the one thing my parents had spent 6 years convincing me I didn't deserve: respectability. I didn't tell my parents I was applying. If I had, my mother would have smiled her condescending smile and told me I was aiming too high. So, I kept my mouth shut. I took $40 I had secretly hidden in my mattress, went to a thrift store, and painstakingly searched the racks until I found a navy blue blazer and a crisp white button-down shirt that actually fit. I ironed that outfit on the floor of my basement until the creases were sharp enough to cut paper. The morning of the interview, I told my parents I was picking up an early breakfast shift. Instead, I took the bus downtown, walked through the heavy glass doors of First Heritage Bank, and took a seat in their pristine lobby. I felt like a complete imposter. But then, the branch manager walked out. Her name was Sarah. She was sharp, professional, and had an incredibly kind smile. She shook my hand, led me into her glass-walled office, and for the next 45 minutes, she treated me like a human being. It was the most validating experience of my adult life. I didn't have a college degree, but Sarah didn't care. She looked at my resume and saw the reality of my life. "You've been working 60 hours a week between food service and retail for over 4 years?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow over her glasses. "Yes, ma'am," I answered, my hands sweating, politely folded in my lap. "I'm very accustomed to long hours and high-pressure environments." "I'll bet you are," she smiled. "Retail and diner work, that means you know how to handle difficult people, de-escalate angry customers, and manage a high-volume cash register without losing your cool." "Alex, those are exactly the soft skills I spend months trying to train into recent college grads. You already have them." I could have cried right then and there. For 6 years, my parents had told me I had no real-world skills. And here was a highly successful professional telling me that my grueling, exhausting life had actually forged me into an incredible asset. By the end of the interview, Sarah closed her folder and leaned forward. "Alex, I'm going to be completely transparent with you," she said warmly. "I've interviewed 5 people for this position this week, and you are by far the most impressive. I want you on my team." My heart soared. I had found the golden ticket. With this salary, I could quietly save up, pack my bags, and walk out of my parents' house forever. "There's just one final formality," Sarah said, sliding a crisp, white form across the desk toward me. Because you'll be handling large sums of federal currency, we are required to run a comprehensive background check. This includes criminal history and a full credit check. I didn't even hesitate. Why would I? I picked up the pen. I knew I had never so much as gotten a speeding ticket. And as for my credit, I had never owned a credit card. I had never taken out a loan. I was completely off the grid. You can't have bad credit if you've never had credit at all. Of course, I smiled, confidently signing my name. Sarah smiled back. Fantastic. The check usually takes about 48 hours. I'll call you early next week to discuss your start date. I walked out of that bank feeling like I was floating. I spent the entire weekend living in a beautiful, hopeful daydream. I felt, for the absolute first time in my life, that I was finally going to be okay. I had no idea that the signature I had so confidently scribbled on that piece of paper was a ticking time bomb. I didn't know that my golden ticket wasn't going to buy my freedom. It was going to rip the floorboards out from under my entire reality. Monday morning arrived, and I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I kept my cheap prepaid cell phone in my apron pocket at the diner, checking the blank screen every time I went to the back to grab more coffee filters. By Tuesday afternoon, the silence was deafening. Doubt started creeping in. Maybe I hadn't interviewed as well as I thought. Wednesday morning, at 10:14 a.m., the phone finally buzzed. The caller ID flashed. First Heritage Regional Bank. I ducked into the diner's walk-in fridge, my heart hammering against my ribs, and answered on the first ring. "Hello? Sarah?" I asked, unable to keep the breathless excitement out of my voice. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, the warm, conspiratorial tone from Friday was completely gone. She sounded stiff, clinical, distant. "Hello, Alex. Yes, it's Sarah from the branch." "Hi. I was hoping to hear from you." Another heavy pause. "Alex, I'm calling to inform you that we will not be moving forward with your employment at First Heritage Bank." The words felt like a physical blow to the stomach. The cold air of the walk-in fridge suddenly felt freezing. "What? I don't understand," I stammered, my mind racing. "On Friday, you said I was the top candidate. You said you wanted me on your team. Did I do something wrong?" "Your background check came back this morning," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, laced with a mixture of pity and severe disappointment. "Your criminal record is clean, but the financial screening..." "Alex, it flagged severe, unresolvable discrepancies. As a financial institution, we cannot hire individuals with accounts currently in active collections, nor those with a credit history demonstrating such extreme default risk." "Collections?" I echoed, my voice cracking. "Default risk? Sarah, there has to be a mistake. I don't have any credit cards. I've never taken out a loan. I don't even have a car payment. It must be a mix-up with someone who has my name." "The screening was run using your verified social security number, Alex," she replied coldly. The warmth was entirely gone now. She thought I was lying to her. "I'm sorry, but the decision is final. I wish you the best of luck." Click. I stood in the walk-in fridge, surrounded by boxes of frozen French fries, holding a dead phone to my ear. My golden ticket had just turned to ash in my hands. I didn't finish my shift. I told my manager I was sick, which wasn't entirely a lie because I felt like I was going to throw up, and took the bus straight to the local public library. I couldn't do this on my phone. I needed a real computer monitor. I sat down at a sticky keyboard in the corner of the library, my hands shaking so badly I misspelled my own name twice. I navigated to a free annual credit report website. I typed in my name, date of birth, and the social security number I had memorized since high school. I answered the bizarre security questions. Which of these addresses have you lived at? Which of these vehicles have you registered? None of the options made sense. I clicked none of the above for almost all of them. The screen flashed white, and then a dashboard loaded. Right in the center of the screen, Inside a thick, bright red circle was a 3-digit number, 412. Beneath it, in bold red letters, POROR. I stared at the number. I had never been taught financial literacy, but I knew enough to know that a 4WOV wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. It was the kind of score that meant you were financially radioactive. I clicked on the Accounts tab. The page populated with a list that made the blood drain entirely from my face. There were 8 active accounts. Capital One Platinum, opened 6 years ago. Balance, $8,500. Status, 120 days past due. Chase Sapphire, opened 4 years ago. Balance, $14,200. Status, over limit. Synchrony Bank, opened 3 years ago. Balance, $4,800. Status, sent to collections. Discover IT, opened 2 years ago. Balance, $11,000. Status, 90 days past due. Lending Club Personal Loan, opened 3 years ago. Original loan, $15,000. Status, default. I kept scrolling, the numbers blurring through the tears welling in my eyes. The total debt sitting at the bottom of the page was a staggering $78,450. $78,000. I made $14 an hour. I clicked on the oldest account. The Capital One card. It listed the exact month and year it was opened. I did the math in my head. It was opened the exact month I turned 18. A cold, terrifying realization washed over me. This wasn't identity theft by some anonymous hacker in a basement halfway across the world. An anonymous hacker doesn't wait for your 18th birthday. An anonymous hacker doesn't buy $3,000 handbags from Nordstrom. The invisible hand that had been shoving me back down every time I tried to climb out of the basement suddenly had a face. 2 faces, actually. The apartment denials, the rejected used car loan, the patronizing smiles and the lectures about how I wasn't ready for the real world. They knew exactly why I was failing, because they were the ones who had chained the anvil to my feet. My parents had stolen my financial identity the moment I became an adult. I wasn't a late bloomer. I wasn't incompetent. I was a hostage. I sat in the corner of the public library for 3 hours, staring at the glowing monitor until my eyes burned. The initial shock, that breathless, suffocating panic, was slowly bleeding out of me, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I didn't just log out. I paid the librarian $3 in quarters to print the entire 30-page credit report. I needed to hold the physical proof in my hands. I needed to see the architecture of the cage my parents had built for me. I took the thick stack of warm paper to a secluded table in the back of the reference section. I pulled a highlighter from my backpack, smoothed out the first page, and went to work. If you want to understand how deep a betrayal goes, you have to look at the timeline. I started cross-referencing the dates on the credit report with the major events of my family's life over the last 6 years. The very first account was a Capital One Platinum card. It was opened on October 14th. My 18th birthday was October 12th. I closed my eyes, a sickening wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. I remembered that week. My mother had asked me to fetch my birth certificate and social security card from the fireproof safe in their bedroom closet, claiming she needed to update her life insurance beneficiaries now that I was a legal adult. I had handed over the documents without a second thought. I trusted her. She was my mother. She hadn't been updating her life insurance. She had been harvesting my identity the absolute second it became legally viable. I flipped to the second page. A Synchrony store card for Neiman Marcus, opened 3 years ago, maxed out at $4,800. A Nordstrom retail card, opened 4 years ago, carrying a balance of $3,200. Both were currently sitting in collections. My mind flashed back to the endless parade of glossy shopping bags that used to fill our living room. I remembered my mother showing off a pair of designer leather boots she claimed she bought on clearance. I remembered her weekly salon visits and the spontaneous weekend trips to Napa Valley. While I was patching the holes in my non-slip work shoes with duct tape, my mother was walking around in luxury, funded entirely by my stolen name. Then, I found the big one. Page 5 detailed a personal loan from Lending Club. The original loan amount was $15,000. It had been opened exactly 36 months ago. My highlighter hovered over the date. 36 months ago was June. That was the exact same month my brother David had dramatically announced his new luxury watch dropshipping venture. He had hosted a lavish kickoff party at a downtown bar. He had bragged about securing seed funding from a silent partner who believed in his vision. The silent partner wasn't an angel investor. It was me. My parents hadn't used their own credit to fund his delusion. They knew his track record. They knew he was going to fail, just like he always did. So instead of risking their own excellent credit scores, they used my blank slate. They threw my financial future into the furnace to keep David's ego warm. The gaslighting of the last 6 years suddenly snapped into crystal clear focus. You're not ready for the real world. The system weeds out people who can't cut it. They hadn't just been insulting me. They had been actively managing their risk. Every time I applied for an apartment or a car loan, they must have been terrified. They knew I would get rejected. They were banking on it. But they also knew that if I ever dug deep enough to ask why I was rejected, their entire scheme would unravel. That was why they charged me 75% of my minimum wage income for rent. It wasn't just pure greed. It was a calculated, strategic trap. If I had money, I wouldn't need a car loan. I could buy a cheap beater in cash. If I had money, I could offer a landlord 6 months of rent up front to bypass a credit check. They needed to keep me completely, utterly broke. As long as I was living paycheck to paycheck, handing my cash directly to my father, I would never have the resources to leave. I wasn't their beloved child who needed a little extra help finding my way. I was a human credit line. I was a host organism, and my own family was happily draining the life out of me. I sat back in the hard wooden library chair, staring at the highlighted stack of papers. The $78,450 debt felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had lost the bank teller job. I was still broke. I still had to go back to that concrete basement tonight, but something fundamental had shifted inside of me. The girl who cried over used car loans and believed she was a failure was dead. I carefully folded the credit report and slid it into the bottom of my backpack. I zipped it shut. I didn't feel like crying anymore. I felt a slow, quiet, and terrifyingly cold anger blooming in my chest. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. But they were about to find out that the daughter they trapped in the dark had just finally learned how to see. I put my backpack on, walked out of the library, and caught the bus back to the suburbs. It was time to go home and ask my parents exactly how they paid for dinner. The bus ride back felt like a blur. I clutched my backpack, the thick stack of papers pressing against my ribs like a shield. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like roasted garlic. It was a perfectly normal Wednesday evening. I found them in the kitchen. My father was uncorking wine, and my mother was stirring pasta. They looked up, registering mild surprise. "Home early," my mother said. "Did you get fired from the diner?" Her casual cruelty, the immediate assumption of my failure, ignited a fire in my chest. I didn't answer. I unzipped my backpack, pulled out the 30-page credit report, and slammed it onto the marble island. It landed with a sharp smack. "What is this?" my father demanded. "My credit report," I said, my voice terrifyingly steady. I had a background check run for a real job today, a bank teller position that offered a way out of your basement. They rescinded the offer because I have a 400/112 credit score and $78,000 in defaulted debt. For a split second, the air vanished. My mother's hand froze. The color drained from my father's cheeks. They realized the trap door had finally sprung open. But a manipulator's instinct isn't to apologize, it is to attack. "I don't know what you think you're looking at," my mother started, defensive and shrill. "Credit bureaus make mistakes. Hackers—" "Stop!" I cut her off. "Do not insult my intelligence. Hackers didn't open a Capital One card the week I turned 18. Hackers don't buy $3,000 handbags at Nordstrom and ship them here. And hackers definitely didn't take out a $15,000 loan the exact month David started his luxury watch business." My father stepped forward aggressively. "Watch your tone. You live under our roof." "I live in a concrete box that I pay for," I yelled. "You take 75% of everything I make. You told me I wasn't ready for the real world. You watched me cry over a rejected car loan, and you told me I was a failure. You sabotaged me to use my social security number as a piggy bank." "We did what we had to do," my father roared back. "Your brother needed capital, real money. You were just serving eggs to truck drivers. Family helps family, Alex. You ruined my life for an $80,000 shopping spree and David's ego. This is identity theft. It's a felony. I should call the police right now." The word police hung in the air. My mother stepped out, her eyes hard and calculating. "Call them," she challenged. "Go ahead. But the police will ask for proof. We will tell them you authorized us to help manage your finances, because you are irresponsible. And while they investigate, we will kick you out of this house tonight." My father nodded. "That's right. Pack your bags. But who is going to rent to a kid with a 412 credit score? You have no savings. You'll be sleeping on a park bench by midnight." I stared at them. They weren't bluffing. They had engineered my life to ensure that if I ever discovered the truth, I would be too poor to do anything about it. If I called the police tonight, I would literally be homeless. I realized I couldn't win a screaming match. They held all the cards. If I wanted to survive, I had to play their game infinitely better than they did. I took a deep breath, forced my shoulders to slump, and looked down, mimicking the broken daughter they had conditioned me to be. "I don't want to be homeless," I whispered, letting a single tear fall. My father sighed in relief, patting my shoulder with sickening condescension. "We don't want that either. We love you. Go downstairs, cool off, and we'll figure out a payment plan to chip away at that debt together." "Okay," I mumbled. I walked slowly down to my windowless basement and closed the door. But as soon as the latch clicked, my tears vanished. I wasn't defeated. I was going to war. The hardest part of going to war with your own family is pretending you have already surrendered. For the next 3 weeks, I played the part of the broken, contrite daughter perfectly. I handed over my 75% rent on payday without a single complaint. I kept my head down. I apologized for my disrespectful outburst in the kitchen. My parents immediately relaxed. To them, the natural order of the universe had been restored. They thought the crisis was averted. They thought their anvil was securely chained to my ankle once again. But the moment their cars pulled out of the driveway, I transformed. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was methodical. I knew that walking into a police station with nothing but a printed credit report and a sad story wouldn't be enough. My parents were wealthy, articulate, and highly skilled manipulators. They would easily spin a story about a financially reckless daughter who had authorized them to manage her accounts. I needed evidence that couldn't be spun. I needed a paper trail that screamed federal fraud. My father kept a locked, heavy oak filing cabinet in his home office. He always told me it held boring tax stuff and old medical records. I waited until a Saturday evening when my parents took David out for a lavish celebratory dinner, ironically, funded by the recently maxed out Discover card in my name. The house was empty. I went to the garage, grabbed a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, and marched upstairs to the office. I jammed the screwdriver into the cheap metal lock of the top drawer and struck it hard with the hammer. The locking mechanism snapped with a sharp crack. I pulled the heavy drawer open, and inside, I found the exact blueprints of my ruin. First, I found the credit card statements. I had always wondered why I never intercepted any mail with the credit card logos on it. The answer was in a manila folder. My parents had opened a P.O. box 2 towns over specifically to route all the fraudulent billing statements away from our home address. I took out my cheap prepaid phone and took high-resolution photos of every single statement, making sure my name, the account numbers, and the P.O. box address were perfectly visible. Then, I struck the absolute holy grail. In a folder labeled Tax Returns 2022, I found my father's federal filings. My father had not only stolen my credit to fund David's failing businesses, but he had also fraudulently claimed those massive business losses on his own taxes. He had used the debt accrued in my name to offset his personal income bracket, securing himself a massive tax return. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was actively defrauding the IRS. I kept digging. I found the lease agreement for David's luxury BMW. My father had co-signed it, but he had secretly used my social security number as a secondary guarantor to secure a lower interest rate. I didn't steal the physical documents. Taking the paper would tip them off immediately. Instead, I spent 2 hours photographing every single page, every forged signature, and every damning tax discrepancy. When I was done, I carefully arranged the files exactly how I found them and pushed the broken lock back into place so it looked untouched at a passing glance. The next day, I went back to the public library. I'd paid to print every single photograph. I bought a heavy black binder and compiled everything into a meticulously organized master folder. I indexed it chronologically, cross-referencing every fraudulent charge with their personal purchases, David's business timelines, and their tax filings. I sat in the library, staring at the thick black binder resting on the table. It was heavy. It was undeniable. I had the weapon. I had the absolute proof to destroy the cage they had built around me. But I couldn't pull the trigger yet. Because the moment I handed this folder over to the authorities, the bomb would detonate. And I couldn't be living in the basement at ground zero when it went off. I needed an escape route, and I needed it fast. The problem with escaping a financial hostage situation is that you cannot use traditional exits. I couldn't apply for an apartment because of my 412 credit score. I couldn't rent a moving van without a credit card. I had to disappear like a ghost. I started at the diner. There was a waitress named Maria who had worked there for 10 years. She was tough, no nonsense, and knew I was the hardest worker on the floor. During a quiet Tuesday morning shift, I pulled her aside into the break room. I didn't tell her the whole story, just that my living situation was completely toxic, my parents were financially controlling me, and I desperately needed a safe place to crash. Maria didn't ask probing questions. She just nodded. "I have a small spare room," she said, wiping down a menu. $400 a month. Cash only. No lease, no credit check. You can move in this weekend. It was a lifeline. I took the cash I had hidden inside the hollowed-out book in my basement, the tips my parents didn't know about, and handed her the first month's rent. I had a perimeter. Now, I just needed to extract myself. If I had walked out the front door with a suitcase, my parents would have stopped me. My father would have physically blocked the door, and my mother would have threatened to call the police and report me for stealing my own belongings. So, I had to smuggle my life out of my own home. For 3 weeks, I used my beat-up canvas backpack. Every time I left for a shift at the diner or the mall, I packed it full. 2 pairs of jeans at the bottom, a few sweaters, my toothbrush, my favorite books. I would carry the heavy backpack onto the bus, ride to Maria's apartment, drop my things off in my new room, and then go to work. To my parents, I looked like I was just going to my grueling jobs. In reality, I was slowly, methodically emptying out my concrete cage. I left the bulky things behind. I didn't care about the cheap mattress or the rusted microwave. I only cared about my clothes, my essential documents, and the heavy black binder containing the federal crimes of my family. The final night came on a Friday. It was poetic, really. David had somehow managed to secure another meeting for his useless app, and my parents were taking him out to an absurdly expensive downtown steakhouse to celebrate. They were, of course, paying for it, with the Discover card bearing my name. "We'll be back late, Alex," my mother called down the basement stairs, her voice echoing off the concrete. "Make sure the back door is locked. And don't eat the leftover salmon in the fridge, I'm saving it for tomorrow. Have a good dinner," I called back, my voice perfectly level. I listened to their footsteps cross the hardwood floor. I heard the front door open and click shut. I waited until I heard the engine of my father's car start and fade down the suburban street. The house was completely silent. I stood in the center of the basement. The shelves were bare. The closet was empty. All that was left was the heavy black binder resting on my backpack and the set of house keys in my hand. I picked up the binder and walked up the stairs for the last time. I didn't feel nostalgic. I didn't feel sad. I walked into the pristine marble kitchen where my mother had sneered at me and my father had threatened me with homelessness. I placed my house keys gently on the center of the granite island. I didn't leave a dramatic note. I didn't write an angry letter. Manipulators thrive on drama and emotional reactions. Giving them a letter would just give them ammunition to twist my words. Silence was the ultimate boundary. I walked out the front door and pulled it shut behind me. I stepped off the porch and breathed in the cool night air. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't heading back to the basement. I walked to the bus stop with my backpack and the black binder, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. I was finally safe, and on Monday morning I was going to drop a nuclear bomb on their front lawn. Monday morning arrived, crisp and bright. I didn't take the bus to the diner. Instead, I put on my thrift store navy blazer, the one I had bought for the bank interview, and walked into the local police precinct. I approached the front desk, my heavy black binder clutched to my chest. "I need to report a multi-year, $80,000 identity theft and wire fraud case," I told the desk sergeant. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a weary-looking detective named Miller. He sighed, clicking his pen, likely expecting a standard story about a stolen debit card. "Who is the suspect?" Detective Miller asked. "My parents," I said. I slid the binder across the metal desk. I watched his expression shift from bored to bewildered, and finally to dead serious as he flipped through the pages. I had done the investigative work for him. I showed him the Capital One card opened the week I turned 18. I showed him the P.O. box registered in my father's name to intercept the billing statements. I showed him the forged signatures on the $15,000 personal loan, matching the exact month my brother David launched his failed watch business. "This isn't just a few unauthorized charges," Detective Miller muttered, tracing a line of fraudulent Nordstrom transactions with his pen. "This is a coordinated systemic financial hijacking. They used you as a human credit line." "Yes," I said smoothly, "and I want to press full felony charges." It took 2 hours to officially file the report. I signed sworn affidavits under penalty of perjury detailing the fraud. When I walked out of the precinct, I had the golden ticket my parents had tried so hard to deny me, an official police report number. My next stop was the post office. I bought 3 thick envelopes and mailed copies of the police report, my sworn affidavits, and formal identity theft claims to all 3 major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. By federal law, they were now required to investigate and block the fraudulent accounts from my credit profile. The $80,000 debt was officially in dispute. But I wasn't finished. I had one more envelope. My parents thought they were untouchable. They thought they could bully me into submission by threatening me with homelessness. But they had forgotten the golden rule of white-collar crime: you never, ever mess with the federal government. I pulled out the tax documents I had photographed in my father's locked filing cabinet. The papers proved that my father had claimed David's fraudulent business losses, funded entirely by my stolen credit, on his own personal taxes, securing massive, illegal refunds. I filled out IRS Form 2111. It's the official whistleblower form for reporting tax fraud. I attached the forged loan documents, the credit card statements, and the fraudulent tax returns. I sealed the envelope, addressed it to the Internal Revenue Service's whistleblower office, and handed it to the postal worker. As the clerk stamped the envelope and tossed it into the outgoing mail bin, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I didn't need to scream at my parents. I didn't need to break their things or post an angry rant on social media. I had simply taken the very system they used to oppress me and weaponized it against them. My cheap prepaid phone had been vibrating non-stop since Saturday morning. There were 72 missed calls from my mother. There were 40 text messages from my father, ranging from furious, "Where are you?" to panicked, "Alex, come home immediately, we need to talk, please." I walked out of the post office, pulled the phone out of my pocket, and dropped it straight into a public trash can. The fuse was lit. The bank of Alex was permanently closed, and it was only a matter of time before my family's entire house of cards collapsed. 3 months later, the silence I had left behind was replaced by the deafening roar of consequence. The police didn't call ahead to make an appointment. Detective Miller arrived at my parents' pristine suburban home on a Tuesday evening with 2 uniformed officers. According to a neighbor who later gleefully recounted the story to Maria at the diner, my father tried to puff out his chest and play the indignant, wealthy homeowner. But you can't gaslight a search warrant. The officers seized his locked filing cabinet, his laptop, and my mother's meticulously kept financial ledgers. The paper trail I had handed over was airtight, but the physical evidence they pulled from the house was the final nail in the coffin. Both of my parents were formally charged with multiple felony counts of identity theft and wire fraud, but the criminal charges weren't even the most devastating blow. That honor belonged to the IRS. There is a specific kind of terror reserved for white-collar criminals when the federal government decides to audit them. The whistleblower report I filed triggered a massive forensic review of my father's tax returns. The IRS didn't just look at the year David started his watch company. They went back through a decade of filings. They uncovered exactly what I knew they would. My father had been fraudulently claiming my stolen debt as his own business losses for years. The government doesn't negotiate. They froze my parents' bank accounts. They slapped them with 6 figures in back taxes, compounded by severe fraud penalties. To stay out of federal prison, my parents were forced to liquidate almost everything. The designer handbags, the spontaneous Napa trips, the catered steakhouse dinners, all of it vanished overnight. Without my parents' stolen money to prop him up, David's illusion of success evaporated in less than a month. His angel investors realized he was a fraud. The bank repossessed his leased BMW. Unable to afford his glass-walled downtown apartment, the 28-year-old golden child was forced to pack his designer bags and move back home. And because my parents had to drastically downsize their lives to pay their legal fees and IRS fines, there was only one room left for him. David moved into my windowless concrete basement. As for me, the system actually worked, once the truth was dragged into the light. Armed with the police report and the fraud affidavits, the credit bureaus systematically deleted every single fraudulent account from my profile. The $80,000 debt was wiped completely clean, returned to the people who actually spent the money. The day I pulled my credit report and saw the red 412 replaced by a blank, clean slate, I cried. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of absolute, unadulterated relief. I took my clean record back to Sarah at First Heritage Regional Bank. I sat in her glass-walled office and explained exactly what had happened, showing her the finalized police report. She didn't just give me the teller job. She hired me on the spot, and within 6 months, fast-tracked me into their fraud prevention department. It has been exactly 1 year since I walked out of my parents' house with nothing but a canvas backpack and a black binder. Tonight, I am sitting in the living room of my very own apartment. It's on the third floor. It has massive windows that let the afternoon sun pour across the hardwood floors. There is no smell of mold. There is no humming dehumidifier. I have a door that locks from the inside. I have a solid salary, a growing savings account, and an excellent credit score that I built myself, one responsible purchase at a time. I don't speak to my parents. I don't speak to my brother. The cage they built for me has been entirely dismantled, piece by piece. They told me I wasn't ready for the real world. They told me it was too ruthless, and that I couldn't cut it. They were right about one thing. The real world is ruthless. But they were wrong about me. I didn't just survive it. I mastered it. And I left them with the bill.